What is the so-called plank below the Formula 1 cars? And why does it have to be 9 mm thick? And since when has it been implemented? And do we see it in any other kind of racing? Let's start by the basics. What in the world is this plank? Well, basically it's a wood plank, or it used to be a wood plank. Nowadays it's more of a composite material kind of thing that it's more suitable to withstand the temperatures and loads that Formula 1 cars endure, and what it does is basically establish a minimum height between the asphalt and the floor of the car, and by that you ensure that the car can't run any lower than that, so that's basically what it does. Another reason it exists is to basically serve of a protection of the chassis of the car and the floor, because we've seen that the cars, especially in this era of 2022 era, the ground effect era, the cars like to run as close to the ground as possible, and that often leads to damage. So this plank basically helps the driver not damage his car as easily as he otherwise would, I guess. Despite only becoming relevant in the last few years, the plank has existed for a long time. But the question is, how long has it been here for? Well, as you can imagine, the Formula 1 cars weren't properly born with a plank behind it. You couldn't go to a 1950 race and saw Fangio or Farina with a plank under the car. So when did it start? Well, common sense might prompt you to say maybe around the 70s or 80s, when Formula 1 cars actually started looking like Formula 1 cars, like nowadays Formula 1 cars, at least as we remember them in our heads. But it was a little bit later than that. It was only in 1994, after the death of Ayrton Senna and Roland Ratzenberger in Imola. That year was a year of safety crisis, and the FIA was pushed to implement rapidly some safety measures on the cars. One of them was this called plank or skid block, and it's been there for 30 years or so. Okay, now we know what it is, what it does, and where it comes from, but the question is, why 9 mm specifically? Well, the answer to that is easy and hard at the same time, because there's not a reason, I guess, because the plank, when it's new, is 10 mm thick, and when it wears down, the FIA just implemented that a 1 mm wear would be enough. If they did it by some calculations and then arrived to 1 mm value, perhaps, but I like to think it was some alternative method, like, hey guys, we need to find a wear for this, because the teams obviously are going to wear this, so where do we put it? And some other guy probably said, I don't know, does 10% sound good? And they all agreed 10%, and it became 1 mm. I'd love to think that's how they decide things up there. And after it was implemented, it was very quickly that some drivers become the first victims of this rule. The first one was the legendary Michael Schumacher in Belgium 1994. He won the race, but he was stripped of it because the floor didn't comply with this 9 mm rule. The other one was Olivier Panis, also in 1994 in the Portuguese Grand Prix in Estoril, and he basically was ninth and was disqualified from the position after the floor was found to be not compliant with the 9 mm rule. After those two incidents, it basically disappeared for 30 years and only reappeared in 2023 with that generation of cars. In the meantime, the plank or skid block was rarely mentioned. The only times it would be mentioned was specifically in 2015 and afterwards, when a few changes were made to it. But before we continue to the changes in 2015 to the skid block, I'd like to ask you something. I'd like to ask you to leave a like in the video if you're enjoying so far, and consider subscribing the channel down below if you want to keep up with the new updates. And there's a video right here of Max Verstappen, basically a documentary of his 2025 season that I think you would like to watch. So let's go back to the video. In 2015, the FIA introduced basically the titanium skid blocks. It's not the whole plank made of titanium, it's basically titanium reinforcement to specific areas of the plank that were higher wear areas. And those titanium skid blocks had an interesting side effect. they sparked a lot, and they basically originated what we know in Formula 1 today as that spectacle of sparks when, especially in night races, the cars are going down the main straight and sparking everywhere. That makes for some cool shots, some cool overtakes, and it's overall a good spectacle. As you see, in Formula 1, even a simple plank can be evolved, and it was especially true in 2022 because that generation of cars relied so much on running close to the ground that teams simply needed to change it in order to try and extract the most performance they could out of their floor and diffuser. And this is very different from previous generations because take a look just at 2021. 2021 was a controversial season all around, like everything of it, but arguably the first bit of controversy in that season was especially the ride height of the cars, because from 2020 to 2021 FIA basically removed a little bit of the area of the car, and that hurt one team more than others. Some theories said it could hurt Red Bull more, others Mercedes, and probably the Mercedes were right. And the way Red Bull worked was basically with a high rake concept, and the rake is basically the ride height, the distance between the asphalt and the floor of the car, and Mercedes was a low rake team, so they like to run closer to the ground, a little bit like we see today, not as we see today, but closer to it. And by reducing the area of the floor, you are basically reducing the pressure on the diffuser, and therefore you couldn't generate as much downforce on the diffuser, and that probably hurt Mercedes a little bit more than it did to Red Bull. And all of this to say that the plank or skid block was not a big issue at the time, because you could be quick in more ways than one. But the 22 generation of cars is not like that, because pretty much the only way everyone can extract performance is by maximizing the usage of the floor, and to do that they have to run low, as close to the ground as possible. So the teams came up with a few tricks, but before I tell you what the tricks are, I first must explain you how the FIA measures this wear of the planks. The plank is basically composed of 4 holes. In those holes, the FIA is basically going to measure them and see if they are compliant with the rules. And the hole passes the test if any part of it is compliant. What I mean is, if you have a 20 centimeter of perimeter on the circle, and if only in one small section it is above 9 millimeters, then you're safe. And basically the teams, clever as they are, thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could make a skid block that was divided in two, so that when the car is going fast, basically one of the parts goes up and then doesn't get worn down, and when the test comes, it's always good. And turns out that yes, there was a way to do it, it was very nice, but the FIA wasn't thrilled about it, and when they found out, they basically ended it. And the way they policed it or ended the issue was mandating that 75% of the whole perimeter had to be compliant with the 9mm rule, and therefore ended the short life of the so-called movable skid blocks. But this wasn't the only trick, because there was another one that right around this time was also being exploited, which was the flexi floor. And basically it's a really basic concept, which is the teams want to run as close to the ground as possible, but that damn floor is in the way. So wouldn't it be nice if we could develop a floor that when the car is on high loads, it basically runs away from the asphalt? Yes, it would be very nice, and it was also a big no-no from the FIA. And when they found out that teams were bending their floors in order for them to be running away from the road, they didn't like it and they changed it. And how did they do it? They implemented some bend tests, and basically all the floors from the teams had to go on a bending test, and they couldn't bend more than 2mm. This little guy has been around for a long time, but it was only relevant when teams needed it to basically extract performance of some kind with it. And it's likely that in 2026, with the ground effect era effectively ending, that we're not going to hear much about it ever again. And to answer the last question that I posed in the beginning of the video, yes, it's used in more categories of racing other than Formula 1. The junior categories, Formula 2, 3 and 4, Formula 3000 also use it. You can also find it in WEC competitions. There must be many more that I didn't bother to find, but as you see, it's a widespread technology that started with Formula 1 in 1994. So that's it for this week's video. I hope you enjoyed. Once again, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel down below, and I'll see you next week for the next one.